Millionaire receives accidental hug from a single mother at a charity gala and finds shocking secret. The Metropolitan Children's Hospital. Annual gala buzzed with wealth and pretense, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic shadows across marble floors that cost more than Emma Chen's yearly salary. Her reflection fractured across champagne glasses and gilded mirrors. A pediatric nurse clearly out of her element in a burgundy dress she'd spent 3 months paying off in installments. The rejection letter crumpled in her trembling fingers, its cruel official letterhead burning into her vision. We regret to inform you that your art therapy program proposal has not been selected for funding at this time. 3 months of research, countless late nights documenting outcomes. All her hopes of expanding the program beyond the small corner of the pediatric ward where she'd been running it on borrowed supplies and sheer determination, crushed by a single paragraph of corporate letterhead. Get it together, Emma. You're here to network, not fall apart. But the weight of defeat pressed against her chest like a lead apron. Every sparkle of champagne, every tinkling laugh from wealthy donors felt like a mockery of the children's faces she'd have to disappoint tomorrow. Little Sophie, who only smiled during painting sessions. Marcus, whose tremors steadied when he held a paintbrush. Lucy, her precious Lucy, who found her voice through art when the pain became too much to bear. The string quartet's melody swelled, nearly drowning out the constant mental calculations Emma couldn't shut off. How many more months could she fund supplies from her own salary? How long before the hospital board noticed she was using the empty oncology conference room for art sessions? How many more grant rejections before she had to admit defeat? A burst of laughter drew her attention to a cluster of hospital board members near the grand staircase. Her breath caught as she recognized several faces from the grant committee. Dr. Harrison would be among them. He had to be. He'd seemed so encouraging during her presentation, nodding as she explained how art therapy reduced the need for anxiety medication in pediatric patients by 40%. Through the blur of tears, she spotted a tall figure in an impeccably tailored tuxedo. The build matched Dr. Harrison's, the same silver-streaked hair and commanding presence. Without thinking, perhaps because thinking had gotten her nowhere these past months, Emma moved through the crowd, her heart thundering against her ribs. The quartet's music faded beneath the roar of blood in her ears. "Dr. Harrison, The words caught in her throat as she wrapped her arms around him in a desperate, unprofessional embrace. Thank you for at least considering the children, for giving Lucy and the others a chance. The body in her arms went rigid. Time stretched like pulled taffy as she realized 3 things in horrifying succession. This man's cologne was nothing like Dr. Harrison's antiseptic scent. His shoulders were broader, and the sudden collective gasp from nearby guests meant she'd just made a terrible mistake. James Barrett stood frozen, his spine a steel rod beneath his bespoke jacket. The notorious hospital acquisition mogul, dubbed the Undertaker by medical staff for his ability to strip hospitals down to their bones, hadn't been touched by another human being in... he couldn't remember how long. The woman's arms around him radiated a warmth that pierced through layers of expensive wool and emotional armor, reaching somewhere he'd sealed off decades ago. Sarah. His sister's name flashed through his mind like summer lightning. She'd hugged him just like this the night before. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry." The woman jerked away as if burned. James turned slowly, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis as he met eyes the color of amber in sunlight, swimming with tears and mortification. "I thought you were... I didn't mean to. Ms." His voice emerged rougher than intended, carrying echoes of memories he'd spent 20 years and billions of dollars trying to bury. "Chen. Emma Chen. I'm nobody. I shouldn't be here. I'm so sorry." She backed away, clutching what looked like a crumpled letter to her chest. A drop of moisture tracked down her cheek, catching the chandelier light like a falling star. Something deep in James's chest cracked. Before he could stop himself, he reached out and caught her wrist. "Wait." The warmth of her skin beneath his fingers sent an electric current up his arm. Emma's pulse fluttered against his thumb like a trapped bird, and for a moment, the glittering ballroom faded away. In its place, he saw sterile hospital corridors, heard the steady beep of monitors, felt the weight of Sarah's final embrace. "Mr. Barrett, Emma's voice cracked. Her eyes widened with recognition, color draining from her face. Everyone in the medical community knew James Barrett, the man who turned struggling hospitals into profit machines. His most recent acquisition, this very hospital, had been splashed across the business pages just last week. "Please, I need to check on my daughter." "Daughter?" The word hit him like a physical blow. He released her wrist as if scalded, but his eyes remained locked on her face. There was something haunting in her expression, a desperation he recognized from his own reflection 20 years ago. Emma didn't wait for a response. She turned and fled, her burgundy gown flowing behind her like spilled wine. The click of her heels against marble echoed through the grand hallway, a countdown to— what? James wasn't sure, but his feet moved of their own accord, following the sound like a man possessed. Behind him, the whispers started. James Barrett, leaving his own charity gala? The man who'd spent the evening fielding investment proposals and discussing profit margins with board members, now chasing after a distraught nurse. His reputation for cold efficiency wouldn't survive such a display of humanity. He found he didn't care. She led him away from the gala's opulence, through service corridors and into the hospital proper. The transformation was immediate. Designer suits giving way to scrubs, champagne flutes replaced by IV stands. Emma's shoulders straightened as she entered her domain, muscle memory taking over as she navigated the pediatric ward. The stark fluorescent lighting stripped away the glamour of the gala, revealing dark circles under Emma's eyes, the worn edges of her gown. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd walked these halls thousands of times, nodding to night shift nurses who barely concealed their surprise at her formal attire. "Mama!" a small voice called out, and Emma's entire being seemed to illuminate from within. She rushed to a room near the nurse's station, where a young girl sat propped up in bed, an IV line snaking from her arm, sketchpad balanced on her knees. "Lucy, baby, what are you doing awake?" Emma's voice carried down the hallway, wrapping around James like a familiar melody. He pressed himself against the wall, suddenly an intruder in this private moment. "I had an idea for my painting, and you always say not to waste inspiration." The girl's voice was weak but filled with determination. She held up her sketchpad, revealing a burst of colors that seemed to pulse with life. "See? It's how the medicine feels when it fights the bad cells." James's breath caught. He knew that determined smile, those artistic hands. Sarah had been the same way, filling hospital rooms with drawings until the very end. He peered around the doorframe, unable to stop himself. The scene before him shattered every wall he'd built. Emma, perched on the edge of the hospital bed, still in her gala finery, helping her daughter hold a paintbrush steady. Lucy's resemblance to Sarah was uncanny. The same delicate features, the same spirit burning bright despite the illness trying to dim it. A nurse passing by recognized him. Her sharp intake of breath drew Emma's attention to the door. Their eyes met across the sterile room, and in that moment, James Barrett, the man who'd built an empire on calculated decisions, felt his world tilt on its axis. Because there, pinned to Lucy's medical chart, was the treatment protocol he'd just flagged for elimination in his latest cost-cutting review. The same experimental program that had given Sarah an extra year of life, now deemed financially inefficient by his team of analysts. And beside it, a familiar piece of paper, Emma's art therapy proposal, the one his office had rejected just this morning, the one showing a 40% reduction in anxiety medication needs, the one he'd dismissed without reading, trusting his algorithms over human judgment. Emma's body shifted, instinctively placing herself between Lucy and the doorway. The protective gesture struck James like a physical blow. How many times had he stood just like that, shielding Sarah from bad news and pitying glances? He watched Emma's fingers curl into the fabric of her gala dress, transforming from the vulnerable woman who'd hugged him into a lioness guarding her cub. Mr. Barrett. Emma's voice was steady now, professional, though her knuckles whitened against the bed rail. This is a restricted area after visiting hours. Lucy peered around her mother, dark eyes curious and far too knowing for her 8 years. Is he the man from your letter, Mama? The one who didn't like your colors? The innocent question crackled through the sterile air like static electricity. James felt the impact in his chest as understanding bloomed across Emma's face. The rejection letter she'd clutched at the gala, it had been his signature on it, one of hundreds he'd approved that week without a second thought. Just another data point in his endless quest for efficiency. No, sweetheart, Emma smoothed Lucy's hair back, never taking her eyes off James. Mr. Barrett owns the hospital. He's just doing an inspection. At night? In a tuxedo? Lucy's artistic eye missed nothing. She tilted her head, studying him with the unfiltered honesty only children possess. He looks like a prince from my books, but sad. Like those paintings you showed me, Mama, where the colors are all beautiful but heavy. A startled laugh escaped Emma, quickly stifled. James found himself stepping fully into the room, drawn by the girl's unflinching perception. Sarah used to cut through his defenses the same way, describing his moods in shades and textures that somehow made more sense than words. Lucy Chen, he read from the chart, his voice rougher than intended. Age 8, diagnosed with... The words stuck in his throat. It was Sarah's diagnosis, down to the subtype, the same constellation of symptoms, the same experimental treatment protocol he'd just deemed too expensive to maintain. Please. Emma's whisper held a universe of fear. She doesn't know the statistics. Statistics. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He'd built his empire on statistics, on cold probability and risk assessment. But Sarah had been a statistic too, until she wasn't. Until she was just his little sister, clutching her sketchbook with failing hands, asking him to promise to help other kids like her. A promise he'd twisted into something unrecognizable. Lucy's monitors beeped steadily in the silence, counting out precious heartbeats. On her bedside table, James saw the evidence of 2 worlds colliding. Prescription bottles lined up like soldiers next to scattered paintbrushes, medical charts beside watercolor papers, an IV pole strung with fairy lights and children's artwork. Your art, he found himself saying, gesturing to the riot of colors on her lap. Tell me about it. Lucy's face lit up, the same way Sarah's had whenever someone took her art seriously. It's how I fight the dragons in my blood. See the blue swirls? That's the medicine, but it needs help. Mama says art makes the medicine stronger because it gives your heart something to fight for. Emma's sharp intake of breath coincided with the sudden burning in James's eyes. He blinked rapidly, his gaze falling on the rejected grant proposal lying crumpled on Lucy's bedside table. The same table held a collection of pill bottles, syringes, and, his heart clenched, a small box of worn-down oil pastels. The pastels were professional grade, but used down to nubs. He recognized the brand. Sarah had coveted them, but they'd been too expensive. Now he could buy the company that made them. And here was Emma, probably spending her own salary to give her daughter the tools to fight her dragons. Show me, he said, shrugging off his tuxedo jacket and rolling up his sleeves. Show me how art helps the medicine fight. Lucy patted the edge of her bed with a paint-stained hand, offering James a space without hesitation. Emma watched, frozen, as the most feared man in hospital administration perched carefully beside her daughter, his crisp white shirt a stark contrast against the colorful bedsheets covered in Lucy's artwork. First, you have to understand the dragons, Lucy explained solemnly, selecting a blue pastel. They're sneaky. They hide in your blood and try to trick the medicine. But if you can see them," she made a swift, serpentine line across the paper, "you can help fight them." James's hands trembled as he accepted a worn-down red pastel from Lucy. "My sister." The words scraped his throat. "She used to draw her dragons, too." Emma's breath caught. In all the articles about James Barrett, all the business profiles and interviews, there had never been any mention of a sister. But now, watching him mirror Lucy's movements on the paper, she saw what her daughter had noticed immediately: the heavy colors of old grief. "What color were her dragons?" Lucy asked, adding a burst of yellow that somehow made the blue look brighter, more powerful. "Red." James's voice cracked. "She always said they were red, like fire." His hand moved across the paper, creating shapes that spoke of 20 years of contained pain. She was right about the art. The doctors didn't understand, but her numbers were always better after she spent time drawing. Emma found herself moving closer, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice. "The creative process stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system," she said softly. "It reduces stress hormones, improves immune function. We've been tracking the data in my program, showing consistently better outcomes when patients engage in regular artistic expression." James looked up sharply. "Show me." Emma hesitated for a moment, then moved to the small filing cabinet in the corner. She pulled out a worn folder, its edges soft from constant handling. 6 months of data. Not just quality-of-life metrics, but concrete medical improvements. Reduced need for anti-anxiety medications, better sleep patterns, improved appetite, and— she paused, highlighting a particular graph. A 23% increase in treatment responsiveness. Lucy continued drawing as they spoke, her movements growing slower as fatigue set in. But her eyes remained bright, focused on her creation. "Mama says numbers are just another kind of art," she murmured. "They tell stories, too." James stared at the data, then at Lucy, then back at the papers in his hands. Emma could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. Not cold financial equations this time, but something more complex, more human. "The program costs are minimal," Emma pressed, seeing a crack in his armor. "Most of our supplies are donated. We just need space and official recognition and access to the new oncology wing." James finished, his eyes landing on a particular line in her proposal. "The one I was planning to convert to private rooms for international patients." The silence that followed was heavy with possibility and fear. Lucy's monitors beeped steadily, marking time as James Barrett, the man known for ruthless efficiency, faced a decision that couldn't be resolved with spreadsheets. "Mr. Barrett," Emma started, but he held up a hand. "James," he corrected softly, gently taking the pastel Lucy offered him. I think we need to revise some calculations." Lucy yawned, her small fingers still clutching her artwork. "Did you help me fight dragons today, Mr. James?" He looked at the drawing they'd created together, Lucy's hopeful swirls of medicine dancing with his tentative lines of memory. "No," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You helped me fight mine." Here's the 5th 1,000-word section. Dawn crept through the hospital windows, painting the sterile corridors in shades of promise. Emma stood beside Lucy's bed, watching her daughter's peaceful sleep, the art supplies still scattered across the blankets. James had left an hour ago, taking her proposal with him, his face unreadable beneath layers of rediscovered emotion. The night shift nurses had tried to hide their shocked whispers when they saw James Barrett, the notorious undertaker, sitting on a pediatric bed, his $1,000 shirt stained with pastels, helping a little girl draw her battle against cancer. Their surprise had turned to outright disbelief when he'd requested Emma's complete program files. "Ms. Chen?" His voice startled her from her reverie. She turned to find him in the doorway, his tuxedo jacket gone, sleeves still rolled up. In the harsh morning light, He looked both more and less intimidating, a man wrestling with ghosts rather than a corporate titan. "You should be handling the Gala closure," she said softly, mindful of Lucy's sleep. "Not ... She gestured vaguely at the pediatric ward. The Gala ended hours ago. He stepped into the room, holding a thick folder she recognized as her proposal. "I've been in my office, reviewing your data. All of it, including the parts you didn't submit officially." Emma's heart skipped. He meant her private research, the detailed case studies, the unofficial trials, the careful documentation of every small victory and setback. Work done in stolen moments between rounds, written on break room napkins and spare prescription pads. "Your methodology is sound," he continued, each word carefully measured. "Your results are significant, but you buried the most compelling data in your personal notes." "Because it wasn't properly controlled," Emma admitted. "The sample size was too small. The variables, too." "My sister was part of a trial like this," James interrupted, his fingers tracing the edge of the folder. "Art therapy combined with experimental treatment. The hospital canceled it 3 months before she died. Said it wasn't cost-effective." His laugh was bitter. "Do you know what her last drawing was?" Emma shook her head, watching emotions war across his face. "Me, standing in a hospital, surrounded by children. She said, 'You'll help them, won't you, Jamie? You'll make sure other kids get to keep drawing.'" He looked at Lucy, then back at Emma. "I thought I was fulfilling that promise by making hospitals efficient, by ensuring they survived financially. I never considered—" "That survival isn't just about efficiency," Emma finished quietly. "No." He placed the folder on Lucy's bedside table, next to her latest dragon-fighting masterpiece. "It's about hope, about giving hearts something to fight for." Lucy stirred in her sleep, her small hand reaching automatically for her pastels. Emma tucked them closer to her fingers, a mother's instinct understanding the need for armor against nightmares. "I'm relocating your program," James said abruptly. Emma's heart plummeted. "I understand. I'll pack up the supplies and—" "To the new oncology wing." His words stopped her cold. "All of it, the whole floor. We'll need to hire more art therapists, of course, set up proper studios, install better lighting. Artists need good lighting, Sarah always said." 1 year later, Emma stood in the Sarah Barrett Creative Healing Center, watching children fill canvas after canvas with their hopes and battles. The oncology wing had transformed into a space where medicine and art danced together, where sterile white walls now burst with color, and where healing was measured in both numbers and brushstrokes. James stood beside her, his tie loose and sleeves rolled up as always these days. Lucy's latest piece hung framed between them, the one she'd created on her last day of treatment. It showed 2 dragons, one red, one blue, intertwined in a dance that looked surprisingly like love. "The board's quarterly review came in," James said softly, his hand finding Emma's. "Treatment responsiveness up 45% across all participating departments. 3 other hospitals have requested to implement our program model." "Sarah would be proud," Emma whispered, squeezing his fingers, "not just of the numbers." "Mom! James!" Lucy called from the children's workshop area, her healthy cheeks flushed with excitement. "Sophie has a new technique for fighting brain dragons. You have to see." They moved together toward the sound of children's laughter, past walls decorated with battle scenes where dragons always lost, past windows where sunlight danced on easels and healing hearts. The latest hospital financial report sat forgotten on James's desk upstairs, its final line showing a surprising truth. Hope, when properly nurtured, had an excellent return on investment. At the door to the workshop, James paused, touching the small plaque that bore his sister's name. Beneath the formal lettering, written in a child's careful hand, glowed a single truth. When medicine heals the body and art heals the soul, dragons don't stand a chance. Alternative version, even more concise and powerful. At the door to the workshop, James paused, touching the small plaque that bore his sister's name. Below it, in Lucy's bright paint strokes, "Dragons fear those who color outside the lines." Which ending resonates more strongly with you? I can also craft another variation if you'd like something different. The goal is to capture the story's themes of healing, hope, and transformation in a single, memorable line. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of family, redemption, and the triumph of love over pride. Remember, it's never too late to change your story.